Uh, Hi, good morning. I hope I'm audible to you and my screen is visible. You could type a yes or no. Great. So, yes, before I start with the 1D array, I just wanted to take a quick introduction to object-oriented programming since it's a part of the syllabus before the exam. So, I just wanted to take object-oriented concepts. I will teach that, and in the tomorrow's class, I'll come back to array. Okay. So let's assume we do something like this. Today's class is object-oriented programming. Okay, very important concept. So we start step by step. System.out.println and we say A. What should happen when I run the code? What should happen when I run this particular code? Int A, public static void main, SOP A. What should happen when I run the code? Int A, public static void main, SOP A. What should happen? Will the program compile? Yes, no. That's my first question. The program doesn't compile. The program doesn't compile. When I run the code, what it says, non-static variable cannot be referenced from a static context. Non-static, this is a non-static variable, int A. Yes or no? That cannot be referenced from the static context. That means a static function cannot access the non-static variable. So what I will do, I'll write static int A. I will write static int A. Now when I run the code, what should happen? It should give me the value. And static variables by default are initialized to 0. Static variable by default are initialized to 0. So you will get the answer as 0. Is it clear to you? I'll repeat it again. Static function can't access non-static variable, data member rather. Point number 2, a static function can access only the static data. That's why I have to write a static int A. In case you don't want to make it as a static, then what I can do? I have to create an object. How I can create an object of the main? I can create an object of the main by saying main obj equal to new main. Okay, main obj equal to new main. Now what I'm going to do? I'm going to say obj dot a. So I declared a variable as int a. There is a main function. It's a static function. I'm creating an object and now I'm trying to access the contents of a. So I say obj dot a. So when I run the code, it doesn't give me an error. It will give me the value of a, which is 0. So there are two ways in which you could access the contents of a. If it's a static function, kindly make it as static. If you don't want to make it as a static, kindly create an object of it. When you create an object of it, the memory will be allocated and you could access the contents and that access will be 0. Is it clear to you? Yes, no? So what are the two things we learned in this example? Static function, if it needs to access the non-static data member, then the only option left to us is we should create an object of a class, and that class could, after creating an object, that object could access the contents of A. Okay? Public uses object whereas static doesn't. It has nothing to do with the public. Public is a access specifier. Ashish, you are getting confused. Public, private, protected, default access specifier are the access specifier that are associated with the package. That will be in a position to explain only with the Eclipse point of view. Okay, is it clear? Whereas what I'm talking is something called as a static and non-static member. Static and non-static members. Understood? Okay. let's take this particular class, student. Okay, there is a class student having ID and name. Having ID and name. Let's remove this now. We are not interested in this. What I want is, I want you to create an object of the student. I want you to create an object of the student. Okay, and then display the contents of ID, which is integer, and then display the contents of the string. Understood? So, point number one, how we could create an object of the student. Point number two, what will be the default values of ID and name. So, instead of main, what I had to do now? I had to write a student over here. What I had to do? Student. Okay. And then instead of obj.a, what I'm going to do? I'm going to say ID. Okay. Copy it, paste it, and then over here, instead of ID, what I will do? I will give name. I will give name. So now what is happening? There are two classes. There is a class student, there is a class main. Two classes. In the main, what I am doing? I am creating an object of a student. Then I am saying obj.id, obj.name, and then run. So when I run the code, what will happen? It will give me 0 and null. That means by default for an object, integer is 0 and the string is null. And the string is null. Now this is storing the data for one student. What if I want to store the data for another student? Simple. I will say student obj2 equal to new student semicolon, and I'll copy this and paste it over here. Okay, and here I will say obj2.id, obj2.name. Run it. And now let's see. Oh, let me change this. And now when I run it, what is going to happen? It is going to give me 0 null, 0 null. Clear? Just a moment. Pay attention now. So what we had a class student. Okay, this student had two data members. One was ID, another is name. Okay, this is the blueprint. This is the blueprint. There is a driver program called as main. And in this main, what I'm doing, I'm creating an object of the student class. So what do you mean by creating an object? Allocating the memory for it. Allocating the memory for it. That means this, I created two objects. Let's call them as obj1 and obj2. I have created two objects. How do I create two objects? Student obj1 equal to new student. Okay. So how do we read this line? This means create a reference. Left hand side is create reference. Memory is not allocated. Right hand side is new means create object. This particular line student stands for constructor. Stands for constructor. We haven't seen the constructor, but it doesn't take any parameter. So which is the constructor? The default constructor. The default constructor. So how we should read this line? Student is a class name, obj is a reference variable. When I say new, the memory is allocated for this chap using a constructor. We haven't provided the constructor. The default constructor provided by the system will be used. That means now in the memory, what will happen? I will have two objects, obj1, obj2, and there will be separate copy of id and the name. It will also have a separate copy of id and the name. Right now it is having 0, this is null. This is 0, this is null. But be aware that this might be allocated at 1000, this might be allocated at 2000. Okay, these two are two separate objects. These two are two separate objects. Is it clear to you? You have any doubts? I'll wait for a minute. In case you have any doubt, you can raise it. So I hope, see, if you look over here, we declared a class student, right? We declared the class student. So this particular part is a student class. Okay, memory is not allocated for it. This is just a blueprint. This is just a blueprint. In the main, what we did, we created an object student obj1 equal to new student. So this is the reference variable. New is used to allocate the memory. So when I say new along with the student, what will happen? Somewhere in the memory at 1000, what will happen? This obj1 will have access to id as well as the name. And then the question is, what will be the initial value? For id it is 0, for name it is null. For name it is null. Then I'm creating a second object obj2. So what will happen? Obj2 will be, memory will be allocated for obj2 at some different location. What is id? 0. And what is this? Null. Is it clear? Yes, no? Any doubt now? I hope you don't have any doubt. So let's continue. Now what we are going to do is, we have a class student. So can the class have the functions? Yes, we could have the functions. So let's declare void assign, and let's declare int I comma string n, and opening bracket closing bracket, where id is equal to I and name equal to n. Name equal to n. Okay, then void display void display. Okay, in the display, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say system dot out dot print line. I will say display id and display name. If you look over here, this particular class, let me take you to this particular diagram and draw it again. Student class now has got the data members as ID and name. Clear? This is the first part. What are these called? Data members. And it has got two functions. One is assign, another is display. Clear? These are called member functions. Okay. Now normally we don't write it in the same because our logic should be separate and the driver code which is going to test it should be separate. That's why I created a student class, and that's why I created a separate class for the main. Main is normally used for testing the class. Main is used for testing the class. So somewhere over here I have got my driver program which is going to create an object of the student. So let's assume we create two objects, obj1 and obj2. Okay. So now what is going to happen? There is going to be two functions. There are going to be two objects, obj1 and obj2. What are the initial values? 0 and null. 0 and null. So what I'm going to do after this is, after creating two objects, I'm going to say obj1 dot assign. And I'm going to pass certain values such as 1 and ABC. So what is going to happen? This 1 and ABC will be assigned to ID and name. So what is going to be the ID? 1. What is going to be the name? ABC. How you know it is for obj1? Because on my left hand side I have obj1. That means for this particular object, kindly call a assign function where 1 will be assigned to ID, ABC will be assigned to name. Then we have something called as obj2 dot assign 2 and xyz. So what this is going to do? This is going to assign 2 and the name will be xyz. Clear? Now I want to display the content. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to say obj1 dot display. So what will display do? Will display the contents of the first object. Then when I say obj2 dot display, what it is going to do? It is going to display the contents of the second object, which is obj2. Is it clear to you that my class will be the combination of data members and member function? The job of the data members is to hold the value. The job of the member function is to assign the value. If you have any doubts, kindly raise it within a minute. Then I'll continue to the code window. Looks like students don't have the doubt. So let's go to the code window. In the code window, what I did, as explained in the diagram, we have a student class with assign and the display, and the class ends over here, right? In the main, what I did, I created two objects. In the main, I created two objects, object 1 and object 2. Let me bring this down. So let me come somewhere down over here, and by default it is going to be 0 and null, and then I can say obj1 dot assign. Okay, but what value you want to assign, that will have to specify. So 1 comma ABC. 1 is ID, ABC is a name, and then copy it, paste it, obj2 dot assign. So 2 xyz. Done. Now we need to display it also. So I will say obj1 dot display, and then I will say obj2 dot display. Yeah. Point number 1. What we learned? We learned how to create two objects, obj1 and obj2. What I learned that by default they are having the value as 0 and null. Now what I learned over here, how to call a function. Which function? Assign. Let's go and have a look at the assign function. Assign takes how many parameter? Two parameter. One is integer, second is a string. And that value is assigned to ID and the name. If you look over here, this I, which is 1, is assigned to ID. This ABC, which is N, is assigned to name. And then I display the contents of ID and name. That is for the first object. That is for this particular object, which is done over here. Now I need to display the content. So I display it by saying obj1.display. What I do, I display the contents of the second object by saying obj2.display. And for the second, what I have done, I have assigned the value 2 comma xyz. So when I run the code, initially what it should give me, 0 and null, and then it should give me the value 1 abc 2 xyz. Let's click on the run. Seems so always remember, the logic will be in one separate class. Okay, the logic will be in one separate class, the testing will be in other class. So let's see what mistake I have done. Class student void assign. So initially obj1 is 0 null, obj2 is 0 null because of this statement. Because I'm creating two objects, by default they are going to have the value 0 and null as seen in the previous example. Then what I do, I call the function assign. What is the job of the assign? Assign job is to assign the roll number and the name, which I did, and then made a call to the display function. So what will display do? 1 ABC for the first object, and then it will say 2 XYZ for the second object. Is it clear to you? Yes, no? In case you have any doubts, kindly raise it right now. We'll just wait for a minute. Because by default when the object is created, integers will be 0, integer float, double will be 0, and string will be null, boolean will be false. Any further doubt? So when object is created, by default integer, float, double will be 0, strings will be null, boolean will be false. Kindly note, there is a main class, there is a main function in which you can create as many objects as you want. In fact, if I want to store the details of the 350 students, I could say student square bracket obj1 equal to new student and in the bracket 350. So what it is going to do, it is going to create 350 objects. So here I just illustrated two objects over here. And then what will happen? each and every object will have a separate copy of the data, and each and every object will be having a separate copy of the data, but there will be only one copy of the function. Is it clear? Understood? Okay. We'll come to static, don't worry, we'll come to the static. Now, what is wrong with this particular approach? What is wrong with this particular approach is something like this. What happens if I do something like this? Will the program give an error? The class has got, the class name is student, there is a assign function, there is a display function. Okay, in the main, there is a main function. I'm creating an object ID and name. Sorry, I'm displaying the value of ID and the name. And then I forget to make a call to assign. Directly, I make a call to the display. Will the code run? Yes, no. Will the code run? Yes, no. The code will definitely run. Why? It is your headache. You didn't call the assign. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to display the value. And what will be the default value? 0 and null. So now if I run the code, you're always going to get 0 null, 0 null, 0 null, 0 null. The first two 0 null is for the initial value. And since you didn't assign the value, because of this two statement, obj1 and obj2 displayed 0 and null. 0 and null. So whenever we are initializing, it is mandatory for the programmer to mention the assign function. Assign is just a name I have given. You could have given the name such as input. There is another concept called as constructor, which is called automatically when the object is created. So let's have a look at that particular code. I will remove void and I will give the same name, student. I will remove this. I'm going to teach you now what is a constructor. Okay, just a moment. And here let me give the value as 0 and let me give ABC. There is a class student, there is a constructor, there is a display. Okay, created two objects and made a call. Let's remove this. Now we have understood that concept, and let's call the display function. Okay, so point number 1, what is this function called? It's a constructor. It's a constructor. What is a constructor? A constructor is a function having same name as class. Is having the same name as a class. Okay, is called automatically when object is created. The important point is called automatically. This is important. Is called automatically when the object is created. Secondly, does not have return type. Does not have a return type. Okay, does not have a return type. So look at this particular function name, student, having the same name as a class. First point is satisfied. Okay, third point, does not have a return type. Yes, it does not have a return type, not even void. It does not have that particular return type. Second point is called automatically when the object is created. That means as soon as I do something like this, student obj1 is equal to new student, I'm creating an object. So as soon as this line is executed, what should happen is it should come over here to the constructor, assign the value 0 to ID, assign the value of ABC to name. When I create a second object obj2, what should happen? It should automatically come to the constructor, assign the value 0 to ID, assign the value ABC to name. Really check whether the constructor is called or not. Let's put system.out.println over here. Okay, constructor called, and I'll put a semicolon, and I'll keep a semicolon. Now let's run the code. What I did, created two objects, made a call to the display function. Let's check whether the constructor is called automatically or not. Yes. So I didn't make a call to the constructor. It was just creating this particular object. So what happened? It went over here. It displayed the constructor call. It displays ID is 0, name is ABC, which was displayed when we made a call to the display function. Okay. So when I run the code, what should happen? It should give me constructor call twice. Why twice? For a very simple reason. How many objects we have created? 2. So let's understand what is happening in the memory now. Student obj1 is equal to new student. Control comes here to which particular part? Constructor. What happened? Constructor called, ID is 0, name is ABC. So first object will have 0 and ABC. Then I say student obj2 is equal to new student. So what should happen? It should come to the constructor, display constructor called, ID is 0, name is ABC. Then I say obj1 dot display, so it should display the ID and the name, which is nothing but 0 and ABC. And for the second object, obj2 dot display 0 and ABC. I hope it is clear. I'll explain it with this diagram. If you look at this particular diagram, what is the name of the class? Student. Data members, ID and name. What we have now, we don't have a assign function. Rather, what we have a constructor. We have a constructor. Okay, this is a constructor and there is a display function. And there is a display function. Clear? Now, when I execute, and let's see the code over here, how the code is written. Student, opening bracket, closing bracket, and here I say ID is equal to 0 and name is equal to ABC, and close this. No return type. Okay, no return type. Now when I say student obj1 equal to new student, what was hammered to you? The concept that was hammered to you was, this is a class name, this is a reference variable, this is used to create an object, and this is a constructor. So what I'm referring to now is this particular chap, and this particular chap will assign 0 to ID and ABC to name. That means somewhere in the memory now what has happened is obj1 is created with the value ID as 0 and name as ABC. When the second line is called by saying student obj2 equal to new student, okay, what is going to happen? Somewhere in the memory, it is going to create obj2, okay, with the ID as 0 and name as ABC, Clear? And then when I make a call to the display function, it is going to display the contents. Understood? Any doubt over here? Yes, no? If you have any doubts, kindly raise it now. Is it clear, Sahil? Yes, coming to it. Now what happened was, in the constructor, we assigned the value ID is equal to 0 and name is equal to ABC. But in real life, it doesn't work. In real life, it doesn't work that way. So what you have to do is something like this. I will tell you and you have to do it. Let me paste this code over here. What you're supposed to do, let me check whether the constructor code was copied or some other code. Yeah. Now what you're supposed to do, all of you please pay attention. Let's remove this now, since you already know what is a constructor. Now what I want you to do is, I don't want you to assign id is equal to 0 and name is equal to abc. What I want is, I want you to accept the data into id and name using a scanner object. So I want you to create an object and assign the value to id and name. Clear? So write that particular code, make the changes. Is the question clear to you? The question is, I do not want to assign the values 0 and ABC to ID and name. I want to create a scanner object and accept the data for ID and name. What I want you to do is something like this. Pay attention to the slide. I don't want ये जो code है यहाँ, it shouldn't be there. Rather, what it should be something like this. ID is equal to some scanner object dot next int. ठीक है, उसके बाद नेम इज इक्वल टू ओबीजे डॉट, आप फाइंड आउट कर लेना क्या है, नेक्स्ट लाइन है, नेक्स्ट है, क्या है. आई वांट दिस कोड इन द कंस्ट्रक्टर so that it can accept the data. So I hope you got the concept that you are supposed to accept the data in that particular scanner, in that particular constructor, okay, and then accept the data and display the data. I hope you are in a position to do it. Okay, good. Now, a constructor which takes a parameter is called a parameterized constructor. A constructor which takes a parameter is called a parameterized constructor. What do you mean by that? Let's understand. Uh, let's pass certain values 1 comma abc and 2 comma xyz. Okay. Now what we are going to do, this particular constructor will change. Let's declare the variable as same id and string name. Okay. Now here I will say parameterized constructor called. Here I will say id no. This dot id equal to id. Okay, I'll explain this line. Don't worry. This dot name equal to name. So point number one, let's understand this line. A constructor which takes a parameter is called a parameterized constructor. Here it takes two parameter. Here it takes two parameter. One is id, another is name. But now the headache is these are called the function parameters. These are called the function parameter. But the function parameter are having the same name as a data member. These are called the data members. The members that belong to the class are called the data members. The parameters of the function are called the function parameters or the formal parameters. In case the function parameter or the formal parameter are having the same name as a data member, then what we should do, this left hand side is what? This left hand side is this particular id which belongs to the class. This left hand side name is nothing but this particular name, and our idea is this particular idea and id and the name which is on the right hand side should be assigned to this. So we cannot say id is equal to id. We should say the current object of the class which is indicated by the this will have the id whose id will be same as the id passed from the function. So the current instance of the class which is identified by this name will be same as the name which is over here. I hope it is clear to you. Whenever on the left hand side, we should write this compulsorily when my function parameter is having the same name as a parameter of the class or the data member of the class. So now what I will happen is in this particular class, I'm going to say student obj1 equal to new student 1 comma abc. So what is going to happen now is it is going to come to this particular constructor. id is 1, name is abc. That is going to be assigned to this dot id, this dot name. Similarly, student obj is equal to new student 2 comma xyz is going to assign 2 and xyz to id and the name which is going to display. Then obj1 dot display will display 1 abc. This one is going to display 2 xyz. Clear? You have any doubt? See, point number one, what changes I made? I changed this default constructor to parameterized constructor. So it is going to take parameter. In case the parameter name is same as this particular parameter, that is the class data members, then we should say on the left hand side this dot id equal to id, this dot name equal to name, this dot id equal to id, this dot name equal to name. There is a function called as display which is going to display the id and the name, the id and the name. So I create two objects by saying student obj1 equal to new student 1 comma abc. Student obj2 is equal to new student 2 comma xyz. So the control comes to this parameterized constructor and it assigns the value. Display will display the contents. So if you look over here, we have a class with the data member id and name. But now this particular class student has a parameterized constructor, okay, and that parameterized constructor is going to take the parameter which let's assume are having the same name as a class. and there is going to be a display function. Okay, now when I say student obj1 equal to new student 1 comma abc, what is going to happen is something like this. Okay, this is a constructor, so the constructor is taking the parameter, hence it is called parameterized constructor. It is going to call parameterized constructor. That means this will be 1, this will be abc. Now this function parameter name and id should be assigned to this particular id and name. So in this constructor, what I'm going to say, this dot id. So what is this dot id? This particular id equal to the id received, this particular id. So it will be something like this. Similarly, this dot name equal to name. This dot name equal to name. Is it clear to you? Yes, no? Any doubt? So the question is how to initialize data members of the class. The data members could be initialized using a member function, B using constructor. Any of the approaches we can take. In the member function has to be explicitly called, whereas the constructor is automatically called when the object is created. When the object is created. Clear? So remember, the member function have to be explicitly called, the constructor are implicitly called. What is the job of the member function? To initialize data member, and the job of the constructor is again to initialize data member. But this is called automatically. This has to be explicitly called. So it depends upon whether you use a member function or you use a constructor. Any doubt? You have any doubt? Yes, no? Is it clear? So to initialize a data member, either you can use a constructor or you can use a member function. So let's have a look at the code which will test your knowledge. Let's remove everything. At least let's keep the main. I'll remove this. There is a class. Let's remove this. Okay, pay attention all of you. Class A. Okay. Integer data member I. And here I am saying I is equal to 10. Then I am saying void display. And here I am saying system dot out dot print line. What do you want to display? I. End of the class. Creating an object for that particular class. A obj equal to new A. And then I'll make a call to that particular function by saying obj dot, what's the name of the function? Display. Okay. Pay attention, all of you. There is a class A having data member A. Okay. Should have closed the class. There is a function A which has got I is equal to 10. There is a function display where it is going to display the content. End of the class. There is a class main which creates an object and then I make a call to the display. Okay. Will the following code run? Yes, no. Think for a minute and answer. Will the following code run? Yes, no. Take your time. Okay, so some of the responses were yes, no, yes, no. So let's run the code. And when you run the code does run and it gives the value 0. The code does run and gives the value 0. So there is a class A, there is a data member I, there is a constructor, but it is no longer a constructor because it's a void. So what has happened now? This is not treated as a constructor, this is treated as a member function. So I created an object, there is no constructor, so this doesn't get called. So when I make a call to the display, by default, what is the value of I? It is 0. So that will be displayed. That will be displayed. Okay. Now pay attention. I'm going to have a constructor in which I'm going to say I is equal to 100. I'm going to say I is equal to 100. Now will the following code run? Pay attention. Class A, data member I. There is a, one moment. There is a class A, there is a function, there is a constructor. So will it give any error? No. Function as well as constructor, two different entities. There is a display function. So when I create an object, what happens? It goes to the constructor. This particular function assigns the value 100 to I. Display, make a call to the display. What will display do? Will display the value of I, which is 100. Are you with me? Understood? Yes, no? Quick type yes, no, so that I know whether to go for the next concept or not. See, this is a class A. This is a function. Function means what? It has to be explicitly called. Constructor means what? It is automatically called. So when I create an object, where it will go? It will go to the constructor. Assign the value 100 to I. So when I make a call to the display, what should happen? Display should display the value of I. What is the value of I? 100. Now, can I do something like this? Yes, I can do it. Why? Because for a very simple reason, there is a function over here. There is a function. And then I'm going to say something like this. Let's understand how it works. Point number one, this is going to create an object. Where it will go? It will go to the constructor. It will assign the value 100 to I. Done. Then make a call to the display. So what does display do? Displays the value, which is 100. Then I say obj.a. That means, do we have a function? Yes. Make a call to it. Now the same value is changed to 10. Then when I make a call to display, what should display? 10. So what should be the output when I run a code? 110. 110. Is it clear? Good. So in the tomorrow's class at around 11 o'clock, we are going to discuss about the static data members. In today's class, what we learned? We learned about data members. Static function cannot access the data member, so we have to create an object. We learned about how to create your logic in a separate class, that was a class student. We learned about something called as a member function, which have to be explicitly called, that was a assign function. We learnt about something called as the two things, constructor and the parameterized constructor. Constructor and the parameterized constructor. And we also learned that in a program or in a class, we could have a constructor as well as a function having the same name. Because function and constructor are different, because constructor doesn't have a return type, function has a return type. Is it clear? What is the purpose of the constructor? The purpose of the constructor is to initialize the data member. To initialize the data member. Understood? That will be the end of the class. If you have any doubts, I'll wait for 2 minutes for you to raise it. Those who don't have any doubt can leave the class. Document will be uploaded at the end of the day. The video lectures are already uploaded. You can have a look at it. Okay, no doubts. Let me close the application.